I saw this disc. And I'm like, it wasn't a disc. It was a cigar shape. That's what crashed. And then I slowly realized, like, holy, they're talking about an extraterrestrial, otherworldly search and rescue operation.
Yeah.
They were looking for their friends. I know it sounds nuts, but it's like really compelling. People in the town of Varginha started reporting seeing these strange creatures. No one was like aliens. Some people described it as like, it's the devil, the red eyes, small creatures. Primarily the best witnesses were three girls. It was Lillian, two sisters, Lillian and Valkyria, and then another one, Katya, who was a friend. The military had blockades all around the area, and they were all armed, and they were going after this thing. And now I put my life on it that it happened. Did it happen? Did it not happen? My life.
Wow.
It happened. Yeah.
Wow. You had to put your money down on one or a couple of hypotheses as to what these beings are. What do you think?
If I had to guess, so I think about, the web of consciousness, it's everywhere, right? It's all connected. Thought doesn't even travel at the speed of light. Like thought is instantaneous, So sometimes I wonder, maybe we're all connected. Maybe we're all connected to the web of consciousness. Maybe, as Dr. Italo talked about, when he looked into the eyes of the being, he said it was a very advanced intelligence, way more advanced than anything I've ever seen on Earth. That there was so much to learn from looking in the eyes of that being.
The great James Fox, wonderful, wonderful to have you in the Mind Meld, my friend. You're such a legend. Your new film is fantastic, so I'm really excited for this.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate you having me on.
So, speaking of the new film, one of the things I love about it is it slots into this whole, I say lore lovingly, not in a way that makes it sound like we're talking pure fiction here. But it slots into the lore in such a beautiful, illustrative way in terms of really outlining an incredibly well-documented, plausible example of crash retrieval, and then all of the human impact that has on a unexpecting, not rural community, but small community. And you just do such an insane job of documenting it, showing it from the human level, showing it from the documentation level. It's great work, man.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I want to always reach out to my partner, Marco Leal, who is, without his help over the decades, this film wouldn't have been possible. And there are a lot of other researchers that came before me, like Peccaccini and Ubadajara Rodriguez and Claudio Covo and AJ Javard and Marco Petit. They all deserve credit, And I've been knocking on doors for 16 years there, and trying to get at witnesses and uncover more aspects. I mean, we have a lot more pieces of the puzzle today than we've ever had before, but there are still pieces missing that we want to know. Like, for instance, we now know what happened at Regional Hospital. We know the names of the two doctors that handled the creature. I actually just met a nurse a week ago. She came up to me at a private event and she was shaking. Her hands were shaking when this all was coming out, and kind of looked at her, and I had the translator with me, and it's like, she says, Italo's telling the truth. Dr. Italo's telling the truth. He's telling the truth. She's shaking. And I was like, how do you know? She goes, because I was there. I was like, oh my God. So we got more details just a week ago, and this individual, she's not quite ready to come forward. But behind the scenes, she was like, yeah, she gave us all the details. Everything lined up perfectly. Like all those things. So more things are coming out. And then, we want to find out what happened at Humanitas Hospital, because we have testimony from one of the EZA military guys that, picked up at least one creature from Humanitas and took it to EZA, and then EZA to Campinas. And then, of course, American plane came in and took all the goodies back to the United States, which I didn't realize for at least a decade into investigating the case. I mean, that was an aspect of something. I mean, a couple of people had mentioned, like, hey, rumor has it, but this individual that came forward 4 trips ago. So that would have been the last trip that I made prior to doing the first version of Moment of Contact. And while we were there, and I guess he's like what do you call, like flight control officer. It's like people operating the radar that monitor all incoming flights to specific areas and regions in Brazil. And this one was coming into Campinas. Well, actually, it was going to Sao Paulo, and it didn't have flight. It didn't have approval. You have to have Brazilian authority approval to land anything coming in from outside the country. And this plane did not have it. And he kept saying USAF, USAF. What is he saying? I was like, United States Air Force.
Yeah.
According to him, and he was a firsthand witness to watching the plane come in, this general or high-ranking military official, Brazilian, said, "Let the plane land." We did a FOIA request in 2022, and it took January of 2025 to get a response, and it came from the CIA. You probably saw that in the movie.
I did, yeah.
Yeah.
Super, super compelling and fascinating, and almost a tacit acknowledgement without being an acknowledgement. But for those of us who, members of the audience who are new to this, haven't seen the film, don't know too much about Varginha, maybe a good way to start is just take me back to 16 years ago when you first started looking into this. Like, how did it first get on your radar? How did you start thinking, okay, this sounds like more than just another story. This is something I want to properly go investigate?
George Knapp told me a couple of years ago, he goes, "James, don't read the comments,
Yeah, right. Yeah.
It can be really nasty."
For sure. Yes.
And,
Can confirm.
You stop every now and again, just like, you kind of get engaged, and sometimes you just get so like, "Oh, are you kidding me? You have no idea what you're talking about." But this guy said, he's like, "I'm just having a really hard time believing this event and a UFO crash." And I was like, "I don't blame you one bit."
Right.
I literally responded to him that way. It's like, I know exactly how I responded when I heard about it. And I was making my second UFO doc. In fact, right before this podcast started, I got a call from Egypt. And it was my partner at the time for a film I did out of the blue. And I did a film prior to that, which I sold. It took me about 4 years, and I sold it to Discovery Channel called UFOs 50 Years of Denial. Of course, now it's like 85 years of denial, whatever. But Tim and I and my other partner, Boris, were mapping out of the blue. And I always do sort of broad strokes, like, hey, we sit in a room and we paper it up, like, hey, what do you think about Bentwaters 1980? Let's look into that. Okay, cool. What about Phoenix Lights? Oh, what about the Tehran case in the 70s with Parviz Jafari? And we just throw in stuff against the wall, see what sticks, what we like. And Tim goes, and he was I'd done a film with Boris already, and Boris and I, we were tight. And but Tim was my first project in bringing him on board. Very smart guy. He was like a former BBC correspondent, British guy. And he was like, "Oh, mate, got this incredible case. It took place in Brazil with these live aliens walking through the town." And I promise you, I kid you not, I literally looked at him silently, and in my mind, I was like, I think I picked the wrong partner. This guy's nuts.
Yeah.
Like, there's no way something of that magnitude could occur and the whole world not know about it. I mean, and not only that, but I refuse to read one sentence of any research, any article, any information at all about that case. And I'll remind your audience, I was doing my second UFO film at the time. Didn't do any of it. So fast forward at least 10 years.
Wow.
At least, and probably 12 or more. I did Out of the Blue. I did Out of the Blue version 2. Then I did a 2-hour special called I Know What I Saw, which I sold to the History Channel. And then I got invited, and I refused to look into it. I forgot about it. Just like, it doesn't exist. I'm not wasting a second on that nonsense. Then I got invited to Brazil to speak on I Know What I Saw. And they might ask me some questions out of the blue as well, but who knows? But anyway, to speak on I Know What I Saw. And I was going to a place called Paraíba, which is about, I want to say it's like 3-4 hours south of Sao Paulo. And as it turns out, Stanton Friedman was also invited to the conference. And I don't know, a couple days before I was leaving, I spoke to a buddy of mine, this guy, Jeff Sagansky, used to run Sony Pictures. You guys can look him up. He's very high up in the entertainment industry. And he was also very influential behind the scenes. He was always helping me out. Like, I was in my 20s and early 30s and just struggling to try to get by and, you know, just guerrilla filmmaking, really.
Yeah.
Learning how to, I was operating the camera, doing the edit, doing the sound. I was doing all of it because
no YouTube to fall back on back then. You had to just grind
YouTube.
and yeah.
Exactly. No YouTube at all. And anyway, I get a call from my buddy Jeff, and I was like, "Oh, yeah, I'm going to Brazil in a couple days." And he's like, "Oh God, you got to look into that crash case in Varginha, Brazil." And I was like, "Oh God, not this again. This is haunting me." And but I had so much respect for Jeff that and he was so helpful behind the scenes. He was getting me meetings. He helped me sell I Know What I Saw when I was so broke. And so I said, "Jeff, yeah, for sure, dude. I'll definitely look into that when I get there. Yeah. Oh yeah. No, for sure. I'll report back. I'll let you know. Yeah. Great. Good to hear from you." Click. And I was like, "Yeah, I'm not wasting a second on that case," to myself, right? But then I got to Brazil and Stanton was there, and some other researchers, but Stanton in particular. And I had a lot of respect for Stanton. He's a nuclear physicist. I mean, he's the one that him and Kevin Randall and Don Schmidt, thank God to those guys, we knew about Roswell, right?
Yeah.
And so, inevitably we're in Brazil and this, the Virginia came up and I was, kind of rolling my eyes at the table and Stanton's like, "Yeah, you know about that case?" And I was like, "Yeah, no, I've heard about it. And he kind of looks at me and he's like, "You seem really dismissive." And I was like, "Well, come on. Live aliens walking around the town, please." Like,
Yeah.
And he said, I don't know if he was there like a couple years after the incident, but it was like he definitely was there within a couple of years. And he met with some of the witnesses and he's like, "Yeah, James, this could turn out to be the Roswell of Brazil. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Americans were involved and da 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 da." Based on that, and then having met a couple of researchers, and I might have met some indirect witnesses at that conference, I decided at that point, okay, I'm going to look into this case and then I'm going to flush it down the toilet within a couple of months. And then here I am all these years later.
And then you were sucked in to
Now am I sucked in? Now I put my life on it that it happened.
right. It's one of those stories where, of
I had to
course,
put my life, like, did it happen? Did it not happen? My life. It
wow.
happened. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, because it is one of those stories from the outside looking in. Either it has to be one of two things: super sensational, overblown nonsense, or holy grail. In that, not only would it be like Roswell, it would be like Roswell if it happened in the era of mass communication, um, you know, in a way where you can't contain the narrative like you could back then just by controlling a few newspapers and TV stations and press releases and whatever. Like, man, and which is already getting my mind forecasting like what would happen if that happened now, in 2025. And maybe there actually are some cases where that could have happened, but maybe we can riff on that later. But yeah, and you point this out that it's recent enough and these people are still alive. So it's not like this thing that's, stamped in history already and you got to track down their grandson or their, great grandchild's best friend or whatever. Like you actually can talk to these people who saw it, who purportedly handled the beings, and you do that. I mean, you talk to, well, before we get into specifics, let's go over the sort of high level narrative of everything that happened in the event.
Yeah. So should I go over it from what we now know or should I back up? Like, because we just got new information on the, let me give you a broad stroke overview.
Perfect.
January 1996, in the state of Minas Gerais, which is about, I don't know, 3 or 4 hours to the north of Sao Paulo. There was a geography professor / ultralight pilot by the name of Carlos de Souza. And he was driving north. He was going all the way up to what I think they call it Three Hearts, Tres Corações. And again, he's going to go fly ultralights with his friends way to the north. And he's driving on this freeway just outside of Varginha, maybe 15, 20 miles outside of Varginha.
Meu nome é Carlos de Souza. Eu estive aqui nessa estrada em 1996, quando houve a queda de um OVNI, e eu estou aqui hoje para contar a minha história. Três Corações. O acidente foi aqui, ó.
January 13th, 1996. Carlos de Souza is traveling from Sao Paulo to Minas Gerais early in the morning, planning to meet with friends to fly ultralight planes.
Eu fui o único que aconteceu tudo.
Crash witness Carlos de Souza describes a similar object in this exclusive interview.
E a lateral dele totalmente rasgada. Ele saiu uma fumaça branca, não era uma fumaça preta, como se ficou. E na época eu achei que era uma aeronave abarroada, alguma coisa, foi algum avião. Aí eu resolvi seguir ele.
And it was very early in the morning, and he sees this cylindrical shaped object in this guy struggling to stay aloft. And he's looking at it, and he's like, my God, that's no kind of airplane I've ever seen. It must be some sort of secret military experiment or something. And he's looking at it, and he said he described it as a little bit bigger than a school bus, right? Cigar shaped, aluminum, and it had a tear in the backside of it with like a vapor smoke. He said not kind of smoke from a fire, but more like a white vapor smoke coming out of it.
Yeah.
And it was struggling to stay aloft. It was really struggling down and then coming back up. And he's like, man, that thing looks like it's going to crash. And he's watching it, and then he just sees it just go plow right into the ground at a place called Myelini Farm. So he turns off the freeway, he drives up the dirt road, and he comes upon the impact site. And he gets out of the car, and he said half of it was still intact, like pretty well intact. The other half was scattered over a very large area, bigger than a football field. He said the immediate thing he felt, never once did he think this is ET or otherworldly or UFO at all. He was like, this is an experimental craft. Whoever's flying this thing needs help. But he got out of the car and he goes, Mike, the smell, there was like this liquid in the field. Like this smell was like rotten eggs, sulfur, ammonia, so strong that he grabbed his shirt and he kind of said he put it up over his mouth and he was trying to, filter out that smell. And then he said there were these pieces of aluminum on the ground that looked like tinfoil or something.
Yeah.
And he picked one of them up, and he said it was really light, and he crumpled it into a ball, and then it just opened right back up to its original form. And he's just like scratching his head like, what the hell am I looking at? He doesn't see any beans. Then from the exact opposite side of the dirt road that he entered came a bunch of military trucks and Jeeps. Like within a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes of his arrival. And he was threatened at gunpoint, left the area. He's like, hey, I'm just trying to help out here. Like I was just trying to help out. Get out of here. He didn't see anything. He leaves. There are also other two farmers, Enrico and Aurelina de Freitas. And they were, I guess it would have been to the, it would have been of the crashed impact site. It would have been to the west, I believe. Anyway, we put a Google map in the film to kind of give all the different various locations of where these alleged, sightings occurred and the impact site for the first time, so you could really get an idea of the lay of the land. And at the time, they had seen the exact same cylindrical shaped object, but they saw it at like 3, maybe in the middle of the night. They said they wouldn't have known it was there had their farm animals not gone crazy and woke them up. And look out the window, and there was this cylindrical shaped craft, and they described it as like the same thing as Carlos did.
Yeah.
And they said it was struggling to stay in the air. Like they were expecting it to hit the ground, but it didn't. They didn't see it hit the ground. And that was, as the crow flies, not far away from where it ultimately impacted. And now we have more firsthand eyewitness testimony from Fabio Furtado at that farm. And we show it again on the Google Maps, where the thing was in distress, cylindrical shape. He didn't see the gas. It's kind of more overhead. But that's new. And then, I don't know, 5-6 days later, in the town of Varginha, and everyone's scratching their heads, like, was there an escape pod? Was there, did these creatures come from that impact site and take the waterways in? That a lot of people speculate that's the case. We don't know. But people in the town of Varginha started reporting seeing these strange creatures. No one was like aliens. Some people described it as like, it's the devil, the red eyes, small creatures. Primarily the best witnesses were three girls. It was Lillian, two sisters, Lillian and Valkyria, and then another one, Katya, who was a friend. Katya was 21, 22. It's funny, I asked her just the other day, I thought you were 21. She goes, no, I think I was 22. I was like, wouldn't you know how old?
Yeah.
Anyway, she always reported that she was 21, but maybe she was 22. And then Valkyria was 14. Her sister Liliane was 16.
As irmãs Valkyria de 14 e Liliane de 16 também estão muito assustadas. É a primeira vez que elas voltam a este lugar desde o dia 20 de janeiro, sábado.
Aquela coisa estranha, redonda, nossa, tava super estranho.
Ai, tinha uns negócios tipo chifre na cabeça. Tinha assim, a pele marrom, parecendo que passou algum óleo no corpo. Tinha um pé grande, uns olhos super regalados, vermelho.
Meu nome é Liliane Silva. Em 1996, eu vi uma criatura estranha ali.
Meu nome é Valquíria Silva. Em 1996, eu vi uma criatura estranha ali.
Meu nome é Cátia Xavier. Em 1996, eu vi uma criatura estranha ali.
And they were taking a shortcut through this little. It was like a little open field kind of box in. It was under an area that was going to be developed. And there was a cinder block wall, and there was some graffiti on the cinder block wall. It was like 3:00 in the afternoon, blazing hot. January is summer in Brazil. Really, really hot day. And they're going through this little field with I don't know, maybe like ankle or above ankle high grass. And they look at this and she said what caught her attention in the direction of where they ultimately saw this creature was there was graffiti on the cinder block walls. So they're kind of checking the graffiti out. And then they look and they see what they thought was like, is that a statue? Is that a statue? Like, what the hell is that thing?
Yeah.
And the creature crouched down.
And he was doing graffiti. That little Zaligna. Yeah.
Little symbols, alien symbols. And it looked very weak and feeble and afraid and vulnerable. And one of the girls just screams. I think it was Liliane. But the creature at that point turned and looked all of the girls dead square in the eyes. They had these red eyes, big red eyes, 3 or 4 times the size of our eyes, and teardrop shaped head, spindly arms, spindly legs, 3.5, 4 feet tall max, and brown oily skin that was excreting some kind of, like it was suffering, almost like it was excreting something in the really hot summer.
Yeah.
And 2 of the girls, the 2 sisters. Well, the older sister, who's 16, Liliane, grabs her younger sister, Valkyria, hightails it out of there. And they realize they get about, 150 feet away. And they're like, oh, shoot. I left Katya behind. And Katya is frozen in her tracks, locked eyes on this creature. And so Liliane leaves her younger sister, Valkyria, behind and goes back and grabs Katya and yanks her out of there. But Katya just said to me, just like a week ago, we were in Brazil together. And she was like, I keep thinking, like, what would have happened? Like, this creature wanted help.
Right.
What would have happened if I would have given this creature help? Like, brought him inside, because the military had blockades all around the area, and they were all armed, and they were going after this thing. And it was hiding from the military. And she said it was non-threatening. It was scared. It was feeble, weak, scared, suffering. It was hot, and wanted help. And I think she even went as far as to say, like, it was either like, leave me here or help me. And but she was reminiscing, and she's like, gosh, think about what a different outcome it would have been had I helped it and brought it into, to cover. That's another story. But
yeah. Do pardon the interloping, my friends. Can one interlope upon themselves? That is a brain tingler that we will save for another transmission. You may have noticed that I have shortened my introductions, yet tickling the algorithm, stimulating it in all ways does remain of the utmost importance. So please do like, subscribe, comment, share. Also, we do have an ever swelling library of member-only/patron-only content, both on the YouTube members page and at patreon.com/third-eye-drops. If you do join via the latter, you'll also get access to a patron-only Discord server and access to live mind melds with myself, occasional special guests, along with, of course, a number of other seekers just like yourself. I do hope to commune with you there, but in the meantime, back to the mind meld. No, not to derail you at all, because you're doing a fantastic job of summarizing this, but two pieces of lore or fascinating facts that I want to zoom in on quickly, because they echo throughout the other occasions as well, not just what happened in Virginia. The first thing is whatever the ship was made of, right? Like anybody who knows the Roswell story and several other stories knows that there is this material that is strangely flexible and has like this shape memory. So no matter what you do with it, it like just goes back to its original form. This is something purportedly that happened at Roswell also. And speaking of FOIA documents, have you ever seen that FOIA document where I'm forgetting the guy's name who submitted it, but some researcher submitted a FOIA document for nitinol? And it's another one of these incredibly fascinating reads, because it almost seems like a tacit admission that it may have an extraterrestrial reverse engineered origin within the FOIA document. Because it's very similar to yours, where it comes back with a we can either confirm or deny sort of answer on the origins of that substance. So yeah, very interesting stuff.
It's amazing they use a National Security Act signed in 1949. We can neither confirm nor deny that, national security, therefore your request is denied. It's like, you're not even going to tell me, oh yeah, we had this flight go in and this flight. Nope, they wouldn't do that. And I've actually had a gentleman in the Air Force that I've been working with kind of behind the scenes. He was a colonel, also a fighter pilot. And he's like, I know international flights, they would have had to refuel here. They would have had to do that. And we have a photograph of a plane on the tarmac, and we think it's Campinas, but it's just like, maybe we can put it through AI because we can't read the tail numbers. When you zoom in, it's too blurry. But if we had those tail numbers, we have the colors on the tail numbers, and the colors lead us to a base either in North Carolina, I think it was, or Langley. I don't. Anyway, so we're still working on it. It's a work in progress. We're constantly getting new leads, and we now, for the first time ever, we've got leads on. We actually have names in the last couple of years of people who allegedly shot video and took photographs onto their houses. Like we're doing everything we can to uncover this. We put out huge rewards, for it. I made an announcement at an event with the mayor just recently, just last week. And I'm going back again next month. What to do if anybody comes across some of this material. And I know there's from what I've been told by people in a position to know, there are at least 4 or 5 different photographic documentation. Some from the fire department, police department. I interviewed the chief of police, Pedro Aguirre, and he confirmed that. He eventually, he might have even had one. That's why. But So, but let me go. I'll go back. So
can I ask one more question about the substance?
Absolutely.
Did because this is another would be another incredibly compelling, almost holy grail level discovery, is if someone may have found a piece of that material. Yeah. And obviously, again, this is recent enough where maybe you could, take a really fine-tooth comb through that area and find little pieces of anything. Any potentially credible rumors of materials being out there?
Yeah. Wow. We are in touch with an individual through someone else. I've never had direct contact with this individual, but through somebody else that we've been working with for over a decade that we know and we trust. And that individual is here's what we know. It's not a photograph, but it's evidence. And their response was, the baby is in the vault. So we had arranged on last January, when we were there filming with the doctors and the forensic pathologists, we tried to get a meeting. And the individual was out of town, but was willing to meet with us. We were all, hey, we'll stay a couple extra days if that's what's needed. It fell apart. And then we tried again this time round, and it didn't work. And I'm going to try again next month. I don't know, man. But but also took a metal detector to the alleged impact. Excuse me, the alleged impact site, and we spent probably 24 hours. And the guy that I took, professional, that's what he does. He goes, "Look, man, to do this right, this would take 4 to 6 weeks." And if you look at if you look at the first version of the documentary Moment of Contact, the new one's called Moment of Contact: New Revelations of Alien Encounters, because it's way more than a director's cut. People are like, director's cut 2026. It's a lot has changed. But anyway, you look at the aerial view of the alleged impact site from the first version, and you can see the ground is very different. Like how whatever affect that ground, that topsoil, it looks very different than from the surrounding area. You can see it from the air. And then when we went back this time, it's changed even again. They plowed a bunch of stuff. They planted either coffee beans or something in that area. It's changed again.
They should be charging a lot of money for those beans. It could be maybe they'd be either turn you into some kind of X-Men.
Little otherworldly kick to them, right?
Yeah.
But anyway,
the second,
we've had a couple of different people say that there is material somewhere in the town. And I've had some of the leading researchers like Paccaccini, who's he's convinced that there's photographic evidence and it's in the town of Varginha. It's in the hands of whoever it's in the hands of. And when the time is right and they want to reveal it, they will. And there's nothing I'm going to do. I don't know.
It's gotta be.
I'm trying.
There's gotta be.
So let me get back. So the girls have the sighting, right?
Yeah. Could I ask you about the smell?
Yes.
That's the other thing I'm so curious about, because that's like a persistent character and a persistent fact throughout this whole story, as we're going to see as you continue through the story, is just how offensive and persistent this smell was. And I was curious, is this a feature of other stories you're aware of too? Like a smell like this that just is super noxious and ammonia-like?
So I've had other people say that they have. I personally haven't heard of that, but that doesn't mean anything, because this is this is the first time. Look, I've looked into Roswell. I've been there a bunch of times. I used to be friends with Jesse Marcel's son, Jesse Jr. He talked about describing the metal, and I went to the 50th anniversary of Roswell, and I had the distinct advantage back then. People that were firsthand witnesses to lots of different aspects of it, right? Friends with people that went out to the debris field because there was an impact site. Then there was the final location of where the pod apparently ended up with the beans inside. Mac Brazel, the guy that was the rancher. But in any case, nobody ever described that smell at Roswell that I knew of. But I've had some people say, yeah, I've heard that before. The sulfur, ammonia. Personally, me, no. This is I looked into Kecksburg a little bit. I looked into 53 Kingman, Arizona. Obviously I've looked into Roswell, probably more than any other case until this case. And then you got Kecksburg. Let's see, Magenta. Went to Italy. It did a little poking around there on that case, 1933. And then what's the other one? Oh, Bentwaters. That was a landing case. So I'm not there are alleged UFO crash researchers.
Yeah.
That's all they do. And that's not my forte. I mean, I'll take a specific case and I'll do a deep dive into it, like I've done when I report on other cases like Rua, that landing in contact in Africa. Socorro, I know that case very, very well. 1964 with police officer Lonnie Moore. It was a landing. It was a close encounter of the third kind.
Yeah.
It's the first time, me personally, that I've heard about this crazy smell.
Yeah. That's just a fascinating one. And I don't recall hearing that before either, but maybe it has something to do with the distress or the crash or there is stuff in, from foggy at best provenance of supposedly these beings or gray-like beings not having a traditional digestive tract, that they only excrete and they only eat certain, some specially formulated liquids, and their bodies aren't designed to process food, so they only emit waste through sweat-like sorts of processes. But I think that's this is like 4chan level stuff, not well documented stuff. But
I had a guy. I was at the Soul Foundation a year ago, probably maybe a little more, something like that. And he was a chemist. And he pulled me aside, and I was like really swamped that day. And I had a screening coming up and all these meetings. But he pulled me aside and he was like, I know why it smells like that. I got a breakdown. I know. And he rattled off all this really intense stuff to me. And I'm not a scientist, but he seemed like he had it all worked out.
Wow.
You know, and then I've had other people tell me that yeah, you know, when like a skunk gets scared and it can excrete this really nasty smell. And then I've you know, scared, vulnerable, you know, maybe it had the ability to do that. Again, this is all speculation.
Right.
I've had people tell me that. And also one of the things that's a little odd is that the girls described it as brown and with oily skin, right? The neurosurgeon who sat with it in captivity when it was calm and relaxed in a cool, you know, climate change room, he described it as being relaxed, calm, not frightened, in control room, and it was more white, and it did not have a smell, and it did not have oily skin. And its eyes were less of red and more lilac, but everything else was identical. So was that some sort of defensive measure that it had? I don't know. I guess it could be. Was that a reaction to the hot sun and exposure to this environment? Maybe that hot sun kind of caused the skin to go browner. Was it like a chameleon? I don't know.
Right. Yeah.
All speculation.
Yeah.
I just don't know.
Fascinating, though. Fascinating.
Very fascinating. Yeah. So anyway, so the girls
Yeah.
have this encounter, and it was really cool because it was the first time anyone had ever made a doc on this. I mean, very few people had reported on this case. It's gotten some, but very little. Where we had a drone, so we could fly over these alleged, you know, areas of you know, military blockade. Where we had a number of firsthand witnesses witness that, threatened at gunpoint in the town of Varginha. You know, I live there. Yeah, you're not going, nope, this is national security. You're not taking one more step. They said that to the reporters too. Reporters were like, which I got all three of them for the first time ever on camera saying, yeah, man, they said, if we ask one more question, we're going to jail. And the other guy was just trying to get through the blockade. He was a reporter. They're all, nope, you're not getting through the blockade. And they hold their rifles up like, Jesus, what the hell are you, you know, 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and you won't even let me go through my neighborhood or whatever?
Yeah, some guy's leaving the gym, just trying to go home, and then yeah,
exactly. So, from the air, you look at, you know, with the drone, you look at, all right, this is the military blockade here. The girls had the encounter here. 2 blocks, 3 blocks away, this report of the second capture, and that was 2 military police officers. And it's so funny. You go to the town of Varginha, and I was just there with Amar. I don't know if you know Amar from Yes Theory.
I don't know him personally, no.
Okay, but you know of him?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was taking him around. He documented kind of behind the scenes of our latest trip to Brazil. And I was like, this street is named after Marco Chirizi, where the capture took place. Gosh, we went to regional hospital where they had a big plaque right out in front. We're very serious. Like, this is where the ET route was. It came here, went to here. It was entered. I walked into the regional hospital. This is just a week ago. I walked in and I was like, right to the reception. Hey, do you guys know about the ET? Oh yeah. Yeah, it was brought in. There's a nurse working tonight that was there that night. And the ET was not brought through the front. It was brought around the back. I mean, they just talk about it like so matter of fact.
Yeah.
You know, there's all these little statues around and stuff. It's crazy. You know, I interviewed 2 different mayors, but in any case, there were 2 military police officers. It was about 2 hours after the girls had their encounter, a couple blocks away. And it was Eric Lopes was the driver, and the passenger, and he was on military police. I think it was P2, and he was on the lookout for something very unusual. That was his orders. They didn't say ETs walking around. It was some unusual creature, something like this. So he calls his buddy, Marco Chirizi, who's also military police, who was off duty that night. And he goes, hey, man, I got this crazy mission. You want to come help? He's like, yeah, what's up? And he's like, oh, man, we're looking for some kind of strange creature or something. And he's like, oh, I'm in. Jumps in the car. Off they go. The creature goes right across the road right in front of them. Stop the car. Marco Chirizi leaps out of the car, grabs the creature with his bare hands, doesn't think twice about it. 23-year-old cowboy, super fit, healthy young military guy, puts it in the back of the car. They take it apparently to a clinic. The doctor comes out, looks at it, was like, I don't know what that thing is. Get the hell out of here. So at that point, they went to regional hospital. and they dropped the thing off. Well, in the process of grabbing this thing, inadvertently, he got a little scratch under his armpit. I don't know if it was his right side or his left side. I can't remember. And he gets a blood infection. He goes in to the hospital, and in a couple of weeks, he's dead. And we, for the first time, got participation on camera in the film. The forensic pathologist, well, the doctor that worked on him, Dr. Cesario, then the doctor that did, when he died, did the autopsy, Dr. Armando, forensic pathologist, and then the guy that studied the tissue samples, Dr. Giannini, who founded the company, IPD Labs, who looked at and he's like, yeah, I've never seen any bacteria do that, what it did then, before or after. And I've done thousands and thousands of analysis with my company and everything. So that's crazy, right? So we have a detailed report. We have a detailed full autopsy report, which is, we've done a deep dive into. Actually, somebody else did it. We got that a couple months ago. But in any case, yeah. And so that in a nutshell is basically, the military has come up with a whole myriad of different excuses. Oh, it was this decrepit, slightly deformed guy, Medine or something, and people laughed that one out the door. And then, oh no, there was a midget and there was a pregnancy and they were trying to give birth at the hospital. And that's what, so, and I don't know what their latest excuse is at this point. I'm not sure, but it's all, you talk to the witnesses, all pretty much laughable. And then, the Beans, one alive, one dead, possibly two alive, one dead, were picked up at Humanitas Hospital, taken to as a military base where they, according to the military people that we interviewed, spent the one night, and then they went to Campinas, was several hours to the south. And that's when the military plane flew in and picked up goodies and back to the United States.
Yeah, presumably U.S. Air Force shows up, takes control, takes the body somehow, and then there are Men in Black like encounters where people are threatened by seemingly oddly enough, I found the family that didn't want to be pictured to be like among the most compelling witnesses that you talk to in the whole film, because there's just something about the way that he so excitedly and emotionally talks about what he saw from the second he sees a second vessel show up in the sky that seems to be
disc shaped.
Describe that for people.
Well, it's really funny because I went down to the town square. I mean, I was just, hey, if anybody knows it, we're getting people talking like, I saw this disc, and I'm like, it wasn't a disc, it was a cigar shape. That's what crashed. And then I slowly realized, like, holy shit, they're talking about, if their account is true, an extraterrestrial, otherworldly search and rescue operation.
Yeah.
Because they all kept saying it was looking for something. And I was like, how do you know it was looking for something? Because it was doing a grid search, low and slow, stop, back and forth. They all said that, okay? And in the earlier version of Moment of Contact, we had done like a brief snapshot history of some of the more compelling cases in Brazil. It's a hot spot, tuba, metal samples, and then we had Colares in the 70s. They had UFOs over Brazil in 1986. And then, of course, we do a deep dive. And we showed some photographic evidence and some video. Well, this time around, I'm looking at the video because we restructured the entire new open of the film. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute. That's some of the best night footage of a disc I've ever seen. Then I look at the date, and I'm like, this was just a couple months after Varginha. Then I look at the location, I'm like, this is just to the southeast. Holy smokes, this could be connected. And we put that in there. Like, it's really, you saw the disc footage, right? It's really impressive. Taken in 1996. So anyway, and it was funny because so the people that we stayed with, we rent a house every time we go there. It's great. It's a little on the outskirts of Varginha. It's got a little extra like security because we have a lot of gear with us.
Sure.
We're paranoid. We're banging on doors. We're asking questions. We're trying to basically expose one of Brazil's deepest secrets.
Yeah.
Definitely in collusion with the United States. So I don't know, we rent this house and it's a little on the outskirts, and the owners are doctors. And they kept saying, "Oh, what are you guys doing here?" And we told them, and we have a family of doctors that were really good family friends, and they apparently they're witnesses to to the incident. So we kept trying to schedule a meeting with them, and we arrive. We finally lock it down. We show up at their house, cameras rolling. They're like, "Whoa, no! We said we'd meet with you and share with what we saw. We are not going on camera." And I was like, "Come on, we'll film the back. We'll do this." And ultimately, we got them to go on camera. And then, again, I'd flown the drone up super high. What I'll do is I fly the drone up really high and I point the camera straight down, and I like to map the whole area out. And to my amazement, their house was just a few blocks away from the girls' encounter and the capture. So if there was an effort to do a search and rescue, that's exactly where it would have been. So everything just keeps lining up perfectly, from the crash site to the two witnesses around the crash site to the military blockade to where the girls came in encounter with this. It was like everything lines up, everything fits in place, right?
Yeah.
So I'm at the point now where I'm thinking, holy smokes, they were looking for their friends. They were looking for their comrades. I know it sounds nuts, but it's like really compelling.
It doesn't sound, I mean, in the scheme of this whole story, it doesn't sound that nuts. I should say it that way.
The whole thing sounds nuts.
but yeah, and that's another thing to zoom in on is the quality of these witnesses. There are so many medical professionals, doctors, firefighters, police officers, former military people that come forward.
Yeah, how many doctors we got?
I don't know.
We've got the X-ray physician. We've got Cesario. We've got Giannini, Armando, Dr. Italo. We just found a new nurse. That individual has yet to come forward publicly. That was like a week ago. He's telling the truth. I said, "How do you know?" "Because I was there."
Yeah.
Like, oh my God. Wow. No, it's remarkable. It's absolutely remarkable. And
that very same family you're talking about, it sounds like they may have had a Men in Black encounter.
Yeah, and as well as the mother of the two girls.
Mas nisso, entre 4 homens que eu nunca vi na minha vida, todos vestidos de preto, trazia uma mala na mão, uma maleta, e o outro com umas praquetas, e falou assim, fecha a porta. E eu fiquei com medo daquilo. E aí eles falaram para mim, Dona Luísa, nós estamos aqui, só que falava. O resto, assinava e o outro ficava quieto, ouvindo, só. A gente veio aqui para fazer uma grande proposta para a senhora, porque a senhora pode ficar rica agora, se a senhora quiser. E eu não entendi muito bem aquilo, né? Porque eu estava até preparando para deitar também. E aí eu falei, mas sobre o quê? É que a senhora fala para as meninas que elas não viram nada. O dinheiro que está nessa mala que a gente vai lhe dar só pode sair fora do Brasil. Aí eu falei, moço, eu não posso fazer isso, porque algo minhas filhas viu. Eu não posso pôr elas como mentirosas e ser uma mentirosa também.
Yeah. And as well as Carlos de Souza. And I'd heard about these so-called Men in Black, and I hate using the term Men in Black because it's like, Will Smith,
You're right.
But
we need to take it back. It's time.
It does have a lot of baggage, but I call them men in dark suits. But I'd heard accounts of them for a long time, and I kind of avoided it. It was just, I don't know, man.
I get it. Yeah.
I was like, I don't know, man. I don't know if I could. But when I got to Brazil, and when I actually got to sit down with the mother, Luisa, and her daughter was Liliani and Valkyria, she just had this purity, just she oozed credibility. I mean, there wasn't anything about her that struck me as, and she was like, yeah, man, one night, I don't know if it was a week or 2 weeks after the girls reported seeing this creature, but it was recent. She's like, I was in touch with a couple of the lead investigators, Paccaccini, Uberajada, and we were constantly in contact with each other. And one night, there's a knock on the door. same house she's in now. She goes to the door without a moment's hesitation, and there were 3 men in suits. And she said that 2 of them just sat there with clipboards, didn't say anything. And then the third one talked to them, had a little bit of an accent, but spoke Portuguese. And they were very menacing. And they were like pressing her to give this briefcase full of money. She could relocate. The only thing she had to do was to get her daughters to go do a press conference the next day or whatever and say they were lying. Say what they actually saw was this. And they made it all up and they were lying. And Louisa said, my daughters are not liars. I will not do that. They will not do that. Leave my house. And they insisted. And said she was really scared. I was just talking to her about it again just a week ago. She's like, I was scared for my personal safety. My husband wasn't home, but she insisted. And she's like, I'm about to call the police. And then they finally left. And then she ran out to the door, the gate, to get a good look at the car. They were gone.
Yeah.
So they just dissipated into the night.
Mm.
And Carl de Souza describes a similar encounter, as does, the couple. Was like, oh, they're from NASA. He goes, well, I don't know if they were from NASA, but they were definitely American. And then they had a lengthy conversation about the whole incident. And then they said, by the way, this meeting never happened. We were never here. And they were Americans. It's like, who the hell,
Yeah. Yeah.
What,
I mean,
what agency are they from?
Yeah. It makes you wonder if it could have been some, ATIP like that's too early for that, right? That's too early for the years that we know that existed, I believe.
Okay. So I obviously was delighted because I was like 3-4 years into making the phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
I did it called the phenomenon.
Yeah.
And it took me forever. It took me like 8 years. And maybe 9, shit. But I had no gray hair when I started. But when the New York Times article dropped in 2017, in December of 2017, about that secret Pentagon UFO program, and I was delighted. I was like, this is amazing. And it was spearheaded by, former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, all that stuff. But I remember saying to myself and my friends, I was like, yeah, they never really shut down Project Blue Book. It just went underground. Well, how do you know? Because I interviewed this person in the 70s, this person in the 80s, this person in the 90s. 2 men in suits showed up. 1 man in a suit showed up, asking questions, debriefing, interrogating the witnesses. If there's any evidence, they wanted to collect it. And this was going on decade after decade. I could go all night. I could tell you examples all night. So I knew it was ongoing. I knew there was an interest. Of course there is. But it just got underground. And ATIP was probably, OSAP, ATIP was probably investigating the investigators, right?
Right.
Those in the know, the legacy program. So,
yep.
And they found it.
Yeah, I want to ask you about the legacy program too, and those conversations you've had with like Eric Davis must be so just like there's this aura of knowing. He's like a microcosm of being interested in UFOs in general in some ways because he personifies this figure that knows something, and he has all of these credentials, but you can't. There are these like key pieces of information that are just basically like radiating. And you're trying to find ways to like get little pieces of them or get tacit confirmations of things. So it must just be fun talking to someone like that, but also simultaneously frustrating to not be able to get like the one specific nugget that you're looking for.
I'm Eric Davis. I'm an astrophysicist and a space nuclear propulsion and power engineer in the aerospace industry. I have worked practically 30 years investigating the legacy crash retrieval program, which involves the recovery and reverse engineering studies of UAP craft, and sometimes also the recovery of NHI bodies, non-human intelligence bodies. And,
Dr. Eric W. Davis is a contractor and scientific consultant to multiple classified U.S. government UAP investigation programs for the DIA, Office of Naval Intelligence, and Department of Defense. In 2025, he briefed members of Congress, revealing as much unclassified detail as he could without breaking his oath.
I have been exposed to so much in the classified realm that I can tell you definitively that they're there.
The frustration from the mainstream media is these are extraordinary claims.
Mm-hmm, but they're classified, so I can't give you the classified info. That's what we tell reporters all the time. Too bad.
yeah, but what's the answer
to
that?
But people like him, people like Hal Puthoff.
Yeah. Lot. He says a lot.
Yeah, he does.
You know what Hal Puthoff said to me one time?
Please tell me.
He goes, this is how much I know. And he draws, how much I know. This is how much I've shared with you. I was like,
Yeah.
What is it going to take to be able to let you guys, because he's like, look, man, we got to figure this out because I'm going to take all this stuff to the grave.
Right. Yeah.
And he damn straight is not getting any younger.
Mhm.
And you heard Eric Davis, I'm sure, the clip of him recently with me.
Yes.
Because I was like, as someone who's super curious and I want, I feel the frustration among many people. It's like, oh, these extraordinary claims and they're not giving us the evidence and I'm frustrated and I've had it, It's like, well, let's think about a way to circumvent that. What can we do? Could we start a petition? Could we lobby the current administration? Could we lobby the executive branch to provide immunity and create an environment where people, the likes of Hal and Eric and Grush and others, people part of the UAP task force. I'm definitely under the impression that Lou Elizondo is a firsthand witness as well. And look, you don't have to believe. I could tell people out there, you don't have to believe him. Fine,
Right.
Don't believe him. Say he's full of doggy doo-doo. That's great. Okay, fine. However, if anything of what they're saying is true, the implications are so profound, we owe it to ourselves to chase it down. Let's at least try and create an environment to allow them to give us the details needed to verify those extraordinary claims because, my God, they've got everything to lose, nothing to gain. They're coming forward. They're not asking for any money. They're just like, I'd love to tell the world we're not alone.
Yeah.
What I know, but I'll go to jail.
Yeah.
So why don't we lobby? Why don't we lock arms in the UFO community and create an environment or lobby to create an environment? I'm told I'm in touch with someone in the Senate right now that the Senate could possibly do it if they get enough votes, that they could provide immunity. I'm told for sure that the executive branch, no question, the president of the United States can wave the magic wand and, love Trump or hate Trump. He's just the guy that possibly might be nuts enough to do that.
Right.
We'll see.
That is true. Yeah.
But we should all get together and try to prove these people wrong or prove them right.
Yeah. Yeah, we need a Danny Sheehan type guy who knows how to do the legal technicals, precisely what to ask for. So it's all just gift wrapped. And then it just needs one key signature or a few key signatures. And then Hal Puthoff and, all these people can just go in front of a camera or say what they know. And then as you point out, of course, that will cause a whole firestorm of people thinking that it's disinformation and debate and whatever. But hey, man, throw it out there. Let us decide for ourselves. Let us use our own critical thinking faculties because that's where we're at.
I know for a fact because of my work in the field, people were like, oh, I don't know about David Grush and deep state and this, that, and the other thing. I'm like, everything he said lines up with my field research. I'll tell you that much. All the different cases that I've looked into or the other fellow researchers that are way more familiar with crash retrieval cases. I just happen to know one really well, and it's Varginha.
Mm-hmm.
But there are lots of other examples of crash retrieval cases that, and again, everything that he said under oath, and I know he couldn't say the things that we really wanted to, the specifics. I understand that. I feel people's frustration. I totally get it. And everything that Lou said has lined up with with the flight characteristics, the lack of sound and, controlled surfaces, the ability to hover, accelerate, from the standstill to sight.
The observables. Yeah.
My research, where I talk to people all around the world. I mean, I do have the distinct, advantage of I don't read things in a book. I actually go to locations, talk to the witnesses, Africa and Australia and China and Russia. I went to Russia. I went to America, across Europe, Alaska, and I know the phenomenon is real. You can't tell me. I've known that for decades because I talk to people on the ground.
Yeah,
they all have to be lying. They all describe the same sort of technology. Of course, there's different shapes and sizes and all that stuff. So, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, before we pivot away, because I'm very tempted to pivot further into the direction that we seem to be going right now. But before we do that, one, I want to give you the opportunity to say anything else you want to say about the Virginia case. But two, I wanted to ask you specifically about the beings, because, this gets into a broader conversation as well about the nature of the phenomena itself. Are we dealing with extraterrestrials, ultra-terrestrials, time travelers, interdimensional, whatever you want to put on it. But given the preponderance of evidence that you've seen, if you had to put your money down on one or a couple of hypotheses as to what these beings are, what do you think at this point?
I've given this a lot of thought. If I had to guess, I would probably say all of the above. You know, and again, this is just speculation. I could be totally raw. I could be totally wrong. I was having this conversation the other day with Michael Shermer, Skeptic Magazine, and he liked the fact that I was like, I have no idea what's going on. I'd really like to know, but I've given it a lot of thought, and I think about different cases, because if you look at what they do, when I say they, the phenomenon, right?
Yeah.
They've done some pretty bold stuff. I mean, if you look at Phoenix Lights, if you look at the case in late 80s, early 90s in Belgium, that flap, if you look at Hudson Valley, late 70s, early 80s, some of these mass sightings, landings at a school, landing in Africa, landing at a school in Australia, Colares, 1977 in Brazil, 1986 UFOs over 1952 over Washington, D.C., 2 consecutive weekends. They were buzzing the Capitol and the White House, right? So they've done some pretty bold stuff, like, hey, we're here. They flex a little muscle, fly rings around our fastest jets. They fly over these super sensitive military installations housing nuclear weapons, shut the things off. Maybe it's like taking matches out of the hands of a baby. However, they don't do something that would unequivocally prove that their existence. I mean, hover over the Macy's Day Parade, the next Super Bowl,
right?
Done, right? All the people, all the cameras, all the professional cameras, all the phone cameras, they don't do that. And there's another thing that I was fascinated by. I did a little poking around on the I think it was 75 or 75, the Travis Walton case.
Yeah.
And I met a number of those witnesses. And there's a documentary out there that a woman did that's amazing.
And Chris spoke with him recently too. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. She did a great job on that. But in any case, I went out to that site, exactly where it happened. I went out there with Travis a couple of times, and very remote. I mean, my God, it looks like when you talk to the witnesses and you talk to Travis just got in the way of the propulsion as it was trying to take off. And he just got, either killed or tragically, mortally, who knows?
Yeah.
And they took him aboard the craft. Now, when he was found 5 days later, they didn't take him back to the point where they took him, allegedly. They dropped him on the outskirts of town. Now, they did it in a way where they obviously cared about his well-being, but they didn't do it, in the center of town in broad daylight, dropped him off. They did it at night, and they did it in an area that was just close enough where he could get help. And there was a little valley where they could fly down quickly and then hide under the cover of darkness in this valley, drop him off, and then take off again, minimizing any potential exposure of themselves, right? But also making sure that Travis was okay. Because again, if they dropped him off 5 days later where they picked him up, toast. He would not have survived.
Yeah.
So that says something to me. Like, they cared about his well-being. They cared about him surviving, right? So
Clearly,
you look at what they do, and then you look at what they don't do. I'll give you another example. Like, I really stuck my teeth into the Socorro case. And the Socorro case happened in Socorro, New Mexico on April 24th, 1964. And it involved a police officer. And there are a number of people in town, tourists and stuff, that had seen the object flying in the sky. And it was like it would have been, it would have been a Tic Tac today. But back then, it was more egg-shaped. It was white. And Lonnie Zamora was on duty, was a police officer, and he saw this thing go down in a little arroyo, and he was actually in the midst of a high-speed chase on someone that was speeding through town, and he, turned off the chase. That guy got off without a ticket, and a lucky bastard, right? Can you imagine?
Yeah, right.
UFO safety.
Yeah, that'd be yeah.
So he turns off and he goes to investigate, and he's going up this dirt road, and he sees this egg-shaped craft on the ground with two entities standing next to it, diminutive, small, big heads, white coveralls, and he apparently makes eye contact with one of them. I don't know what kind of communication went on, but they scurried back in the craft and left. Now, if you look at where they landed, and I've been there many times, they landed in a little dip. Now, if they had any issues with their spacecraft, or they wanted to collect rocks, whatever the hell they were doing, who knows? That would have been a really good spot to do it, just on the outskirts of town, in this little dip arroyo. So they're below the line of sight. If you're standing around, you wouldn't be able to see him. So, and when he came upon them, they locked eyes with him. His wife thinks he had some communication. Who knows? He's dead. But they got back in their spaceship and they took off. He got within 35 feet. He was 50 feet parked away when he drove around to get a closer look. And then he got within 35 feet when he got out of his squad car. He took 2 or 3 steps and he got within 35 feet of this egg-shaped craft that actually had a weird blue, they called it not fire, but it was like a blue
emission
beam.
Yeah.
Some kind of weird blue beam in it. And when it hit the ground, it didn't stir. Like if you have a rocket and you're taking off, it stirs up all the rocks and dust, right? From the propulsion.
Yeah.
This didn't do that. It just cut through it like a knife through warm butter. It went in the ground. And then when it got about 30 feet up, it went completely silent and the flame was gone. It just sat there suspended, and then it started floating away and had symbols on the side and stuff like that. You look at that, you look at those examples and, hey man, contact could have been made. Like he could have walked up to the thing. He never thought at the time when he first was looking at it, it's like he was scratching his head. What the hell am I looking at? Are these children that had a car crash? Is that a car that's rolled over? But it wasn't. It was on tripod. It was an egg.
Yeah.
They didn't make contact. They left. They got the hell out of there. And this seems to be the case. Now, you've got Rua, and that seemed to be deliberate face-to-face communication with a handful of kids. There were roughly 100 kids in the playground. It happened at 10:30 in the morning. It was at Aerial School, Rua, 1994. And that's a very perplexing case, fascinating case. There was a Harvard psychiatrist by the name of Dr. John Mack who investigated the case. He flew to Africa. He put all the kids on camera. BBC correspondent Tim Leach did it. I did a 10 or 12 minute segment on it in the phenomenon. But that was like intentional contact. And if you talk to the witnesses, which I've done, and I went to Africa as well, they said that if you ever, this is fascinating. I find this fascinating. If you ever you're in the deep wilderness and you come across like a wild animal, and there's this standoff moment where you both are locked eyes and you're frozen looking at each other, that mystery, that sense of mystery and curiosity, there's just much intrigue and curiosity with the beings, with the children as the children with the beings.
Yeah.
What are we looking at here? Trying to communicate. Like he said, it was that. They didn't feel threatened. The children didn't feel like in danger. These beings were about their size, and they were 8 to 12 years old or 8 to 11 years old.
It was like a benevolent encounter, it seemed like, for most of them, where they were getting, messages about saving the planet and pollution and nuclear weapons and stuff, where it's like, did either of these kids were unbeknownst to them dosed on LSD or something, or this really happened, and there's some kind of a well, another thing that this evokes right away. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
One more quick thing, because this is an aspect of that encounter that I find so fascinating, and because people are always like, oh, it's demonic, all the encounters that I know of,
right?
Obviously, we've got this whole other aspect of the phenomenon that I've never delved into. I've obviously come across, and I've talked to some of the top researchers on these alleged abductions, and we could talk about that a little later. But for the most part, all the witnesses that I personally have spoken to, it was a very benign encounter. Like there was a level of curiosity. Some of them felt vulnerable, like in particular Varginha. But let me this is a really fun aspect of the Rua, Zimbabwe. I don't talk about it often. So the playground at Aerial School, Rua, Zimbabwe, 1994, it had, being in Africa, there were dangerous like snakes and spiders and just things out in the taller grass, the areas where things weren't manicured and mowed and maintained. So to define the outer perimeter of the playground, they had these big logs, and the children could go out to the logs and you could not go an inch further. Like that was it. And being kids, they'd go out to the furthest point they could possibly go, and they would dance and skip along these logs,
Right.
knowing that if they went one step to the right, they were in trouble, right? And they would do that. And a number of the children told me as adults that these small entities with the big heads and the big black eyes were mimicking the children's behavior,
Wow.
skipping along the logs with them, almost like slow motion. They were joyfully playing with the children.
Wow.
Like, how crazy is that? Right?
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's
I
fascinating.
know. And that was another case because I was doing my first documentary. I was in my 20s. I was doing my first documentary, which I ultimately sold to Discovery Channel, called UFOs 50 Years of Denial. And you can watch all these for free online. Just Google them. I was just naive enough to think that I could get an interview with Spielberg. And I knew this woman, Janet Yang, who worked with him. And I was like, hey, I'm doing this documentary. And he's a big proponent. You know, he loves the UFO stuff and Close Encounters and ET. And could you tell him that I'm doing this thing and I'd love to get a sit-down interview with him? And I was convinced I was going to get it, right? And she gets back to me and she goes, and it was like 90, 96 maybe, 97 probably, something like that. And she goes, well, he's not going to give you an interview, but the fact that you're doing, you know, a film on UFOs, he's like, you should look into this landing that happened in Africa at a school. And apparently contact was made. And as I did with Varginha, I dismissed that so quickly. I can't even tell you, like faster probably than I did Varginha. I remember thinking, Spielberg believed that a UFO landed and got out and interacted with a bunch of kids. Like, are you kidding me? Like, thank God I'm not interviewing him, like, you know, kind of thing. And then forgot about it. And it was 10 years later that I was doing an event at the National Press Club in 2007 with Leslie Kean. I made a movie about it called I Know What I Saw.
Yeah.
And I met Randall Nickerson, who had been working on this case for a while. And then I think he or other people had given me the raw interview clips that Dr. John Mack, the Harvard psychiatrist, had taken of the kids within a week or two of the encounter. And I tell you, I watched that and I was like, holy smokes, that's compelling. Like, where are these kids today? You know? And anyway, as you know, I did a 12-minute segment on it in The Phenomenon. In fact, I did more editing, more work on that scene than any other scene I've ever done in life in a movie. And I got it down. I put it together. I tore it apart. I put it together. I tore it apart. I put it together. I tore it apart. I stepped away for 6 months. I came back to it, tore it all apart, put it all back together again, rewrote it over and over and over. Then I had another guy who was a co-writer, Mark Barish, very smart guy, and he tore it apart. And we put it back together. And so, just my humble opinion, go watch The Phenomenon. You can watch it for free online. I guess YouTube Movies. I don't even own it anymore, unfortunately. But go watch that scene at the end of the movie, and that's my masterpiece. That's when I finally got it, just, you know, and even the music composer, Christopher Hoag, did a beautiful job. That's one of my favorite 12 minutes of anything work I've ever produced.
That's fabulous. Yeah, I'll have to go back and rewatch that scene specifically now, knowing that. But so we brought up, well, there's two things that are sticking out in my mind right away. One is how strangely with some creative projects, I'm sure you must have felt like some of these things that landed on your psyche initially, years and years before you picked them up as like totally implausible, wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. Then these things just keep spiraling and coming back and coming back and coming back in this almost synchronistic way where it feels like it's fated or something almost for you to cover these things, as ostentatious as that might sound. But the other thing that I think I've noticed happening just in traveling, and particularly if you're traveling to do something novel or a creative project or go to like a convention, or this especially actually happened to me on a way to an ayahuasca retreat. That's a whole long story, is that synchronicities and strange twists of circumstance seem to interpenetrate things like this, like travel, creative projects, particularly when you're doing something strange or out of the ordinary. And what's coming to mind right away for me is I heard you tell multiple stories about very weird synchronous happenings where you just happen to get out of the car to go grab a juice somewhere and you meet just the right person. Or
Got bit by a spider, spent the night in a clinic on a drip feed for anti-venom on the Brazilian wandering spider, which would have killed me. And and then I was with this really silly TV show with National Geographic. My God, what a missed opportunity that was. But whatever. And I remember the next morning, I didn't sleep at all. And we're going, we have to go shoot. We got this whole strict, shooting schedule. And I was thinking to myself, how much happier production is when they get a day off every now and again? You're in an exotic place and you have to work the entire time, like 15, 16, 17-hour days. Like everybody needs like a little time off. So the next morning, I was up all night on this drip in this little clinic. It was like cinder block walls, cement floor on a cot, And the next morning, they're like, we're going to go film. Blah, blah. I was exhausted. I hadn't had any coffee. I didn't have any juice. I was in the car and I said, we were stopped at a stoplight. I got to get out, man. I need some juice. Oh, no, we got to keep going. We got it scheduled. Da, da, da. I said, no, man, you don't understand. I've been up all night. I'm on camera talent. I'm one of the hosts. I need a fresh juice. I need a coffee. No. Oh, no, we got to keep going. You know what? Screw you guys. And I opened up the door and jumped out. The hell with you guys. Leave without me. And I went over and I found they got a lot of great juice joints in Brazil. I love that. Squeeze it right there on the spot, man. It's great. Went in this juice joint and I ordered like coffee and a killer big juice, fresh squeezed. And some guy like starts talking to me. He was like, yeah, because I kind of stood out. And obviously I didn't speak Portuguese. Right. And he's like, hey, what are you doing here? What are you? And I said, oh, I'm with a TV show. We're doing this thing on Varginha. Oh, I used to date one of the witnesses. Really? Are you still in touch with her? Because we've been desperately trying to find them. They just gone dark. And he goes, you know what? Hey, boom, got him. And that was the first meeting that I'd had. That's when I teared up when I had heard when I'd met them and gone to that location. And that's how that happened. Isn't that funny?
Yeah. And that reminds me, I wanted to say this back when we were talking about the three girls. Like, yes, one, that is an incredibly fabulous synchronicity story that makes you wonder, like, what is pulling the strings here? But those girls, man, that original footage of them and their faces and that look of not terror, but just looking ontologically reoriented on their faces. It was just very palpable seeing those young girls on camera, that they had seen something that they could not explain, that they were grappling with, that was totally restructuring their view of reality. But any other synchronicity stories from like times on the road or people you just happen to, not to put you on the spot, but.
Yeah, no, I'll tell you one more story that's crazy in my book. It was in the 90s. I just finished my first doc and I was so broke I could barely afford to pay attention. And I just released UFOs 50 Years to Denial. Believe it or not, I sold it to Discovery and I managed to maintain the home video distribution rights. They're like, yeah, sure, take them. So I was selling some tapes off my website and making a little extra cash, just not much, a couple $100 a month, whatever, but it was helping. And I get this letter from a guy named Joe Bellotti. And in the letter was a package and it had a broken VHS tape. To tell you how long ago this was. And he goes, dear sir, I purchased this on your site. Unfortunately, it arrived at my house broken. And I'm wondering if there's any chance you could, I could have it replaced. So I wrote him a letter and I said, Mr. Bellotti, I'm terribly sorry for the inconvenience. I really appreciate your support. Here's your money back. Here's your postage money back. Here's not one tape, but here's 2 tapes. Please, for the inconvenience, pass this along to one of your friends. I really appreciate your support, and I'm so sorry for the inconvenience. Thanks so much, James. Nice. My girlfriend at the time was like, you can't afford to be giving stuff away. You're broke and blah, blah, blah. I was like, I don't want to hear it. I'm treating this guy just the way I would love to be treated. Just stop. And We ended up breaking up because
Yeah, I was going to say, why'd you break up with her?
we were at a Chinese restaurant, and she used to complain about how I tipped too much, right? And so she was like, she looked at the bill and looked at my tip, and she was like, she got irritated, right? She was just like, money couldn't pass through her fingers, and she made 12 times what I did. And bless her heart, great person. We just had an entirely different relationship with money. And so I reached him, my response to her, criticism was I reached in my wallet and I put another 20 down. So I doubled it. Now you have something to complain
Dang,
about.
I know who I'm going to try to tempt for expensive drinks at Contact the Desert next year.
So anyway, if you can, I believe in generosity. If you can, if you can't, you can't, comes around, goes around. Anyway, about 2 weeks later, I get a letter in the mail from Joe Blotti. And he's like, James, I like the way you operate. I'm a wealthy man. I've had great success. Here's $20,000.
Wow.
To continue doing what you rock on, buddy. And that paid for out of the blue. Well, a lot of out of the blue. Okay. I mean, $20,000.
Yeah,
how much
man.
money that was to me back then. 20,000. I mean, to now 20,000 is great, but then you might as well give me $100,000. I mean, I was making stuff on a shoestring. I went to Russia. I interviewed cosmonauts. I came home. I interviewed Mercury astronaut Gordon Cooper. I had a budget. I couldn't believe it.
That's wild.
Joe Blotti, I lost contact with him, and all these years, fast forward, I couldn't find him. He just vanished off the face of the earth. And then I found his Facebook, and he wasn't responding on Facebook. So I saw looks like he had a daughter. So I contacted the daughter, and this is just a couple years ago. And I was like, I just want you to know your dad was so amazing. And she goes, oh, he just passed a couple years ago. I was like, oh, bummer. And so I told his daughter, I was like, you don't even know. Like, I wouldn't be where I am today if it hadn't been for the generous donation your father kept me going, because there were times when I would go out into the night sky. I'm not kidding you, man. And I would just look up into the heavens and just go, if there's anybody listening, I need help so bad. I'm so broke. Like, I'd have my rent due like in 48 hours. The stress, and you have you're overdrawn in your bank account, and you're so stressed out. Like, God, so stressed out. Oh my God. And then like trying to figure out, okay, I got a check for $200 coming in. Do I keep my cell phone on? I got to have my cell phone. Okay, well, I'll keep the cell phone on and I'll pay my electricity bill, but I can't pay this other,
Well, yeah, shout out Joe Blotti wherever you are in the astral realm.
No, bless his heart, man. So that was, that got out of the blue off the ground.
Yeah, that's a fantastic story. And speaking of the astral, this is one aspect that I eventually wanted to start touching on with you, because as you well know, once you start diving into this, the hardcore journalistic, factual, empirical stuff, you do such a good job with that, as do, a number of other researchers. But then there's like these aspects of the phenomenon that it seems like you cannot deny once you've started sniffing around long enough. And it seems like from people like John Mack to J. Allen Hynek to Valet, numerous others. Gotta give a shout out to man, how am I drawing a blank on his name? I literally did a video about him just recently.
Not Richard Dolan.
Not Dolan, but love Dolan. And I have a story actually of something that Dolan and I sort of simultaneously uncovered on the air. It's sort of adjacent to this point, is that you start running into not just high weirdness, but the sort of psychical facets of the phenomena. There's a bit of it in the Varginha stuff. I'm not sure if there's any other high weirdness things that you were hearing anecdotally.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you want to share some of those, I'd love to hear those too.
So when I arrived, and Richard Dolan, by the way, that guy's amazing.
Yeah.
He's so smart.
Best.
Oh my God. He knows way more about the phenomenon than I'll ever know. But he, I just know the cases that I do deep dives into, and I know them well. But when I went to, thanks to Shane Ryan and James Rigney and Paula Harris, they turned me on to that landing case at Westall in 1966. And when I arrived in Australia, my first thing was, we need to find the school teachers that were in the yard. Oh yeah, it's Mr. Greenwood, but he won't talk. And we've been trying for 50 years. I remember saying, get me in the room with him and let me do my magic. because I got a lot of like deficiencies in my career. One of them is not one of them. Excuse me. One of my strengths is when I get into the room with someone, I'm pretty good at. I look into their soul, and anyway, excuse me. There were two people that I really wanted to meet with. One was Mr. Greenwood. Mr. Greenwood was a science teacher that was in the field when this UFO was flying around with all the students. And there were over 300 kids, 10:30 in the morning recess, Westall School. Amazing case. I featured that in the phenomenon as well. And Shane Ryan did a full feature on it, who's Australian. So I wanted to meet with him because he was the school teacher, and all the witnesses that were now adults as children were like, we were standing next to him. We were practically holding his hand or grabbing onto him, all watching this disc like move around in the sky. And so I ended up getting his account because that's a whole story. I don't know if you want me to go into it. It doesn't matter. But there was another gentleman named James Kibble who took a photograph. I think it was 2 days prior or 2 days after. I think it was 2 days prior. Because a lot of times when you get activity like that, it'll be for a few days, or could be up to a week or even longer, where, in and around the area, you'll see activity, you'll have sightings. Same thing happened in Ruiz, Zimbabwe in 1994.
Flaps.
There were sightings in and around the area. Mm-hmm. So James Kibble and he took a Polaroid photograph of this disc-shaped craft in his garden, broad daylight. I think even in the photograph, you could see, and we only had, I think at the time, we only had like a black and white print that was in a newspaper, no original scans or anything like that from the original Polaroid. And he won't talk. We've been trying for 50 years. Just get me in the room with him. I ended up going to he had like, I don't know what do you call these country club, basically. They're exclusive. Wealthy people generally go to these country clubs, and they're part of this country club.
Yeah.
And got like bars and pool tables and restaurants.
Athletic club type thing.
Yeah, but they're private. You have to be a member and all this stuff, and it's kind of exclusive.
Yes.
And really like, fancy. And so we met him. He invited us to there. We ended up, and I won't bore you with the details how that went about, but we did it. And he brought the photograph, and he's like, I've never been on camera. I don't want to go on camera. And we sat with him. No, we totally understand. And we just sat with him at this country club. And then ultimately, I ended up getting him to go on camera on a park bench just a few blocks away, there's a whole background story to that, but doesn't matter. But he said that he was taking a photograph. He was taking photographs of his garden to share with his mother. It was like, I guess it would have been, they would have been spring. But anyway, the flowers were blossoming, and it would have been April, maybe 4th or something, 1966. And he was taking photographs with a little Polaroid camera, and something caught his eye. And it was like, he described it like a disc-shaped object, and it was kind of coming down like a leaf, like kind of floating, kind of wobbling and floating, coming down above him. And he was like, what the hell? Grabs his Polaroid. He said in his haste, he hit himself in the head, split like his nose open or something.
Wow.
And the object went like this, right? As also the kids, this sort of disc-shaped craft went like this, at which point he took one picture of it, and then a beat later, before he could take another picture, he said it went straight up. He said, accelerated so fast, James. I said, describe the acceleration. He goes, like it was shot out of a gun.
Wow.
Like a barrel of a gun, like a bullet going out of a barrel. It was just gone. Anyway, he started having weird poltergeist stuff, activity at his home, weird people showing up at his doorstep, walking around, just strange paranormal activity. So that's why he just stepped away from it for 50 years. He's like, I don't know what the hell is going on here, but this is really strange. And he was an engineer, a very credible guy,
right. Yeah.
But he shared that picture, and he discussed some of this paranormal activity that went on. And I didn't really quite know how to process it, quite honestly, at the time. I remember just going, well, that's odd. But then I've heard all these other people describe similar things. I've heard the hitchhiker effect, out at the ranch. So yeah, man, it's kind of weird. And I actually got invited to go out to the ranch. Brandon Fugel, that owns the ranch now, that got it from
Skinwalker,
from Bigelow. And I thought about it, and I was like, well, I've got a family, and I've got an 11-year-old son, and I don't know if I want to bring some freaky stuff back to my
Yeah, man.
No, it's like, if it's just me, it's one thing, but it's like, I get it, what happens? Because I know other people that have had some weird stuff go on,
Yeah,
you know.
the stories of like psychic contagion or hitchhiker effect are very strange and very interesting. And they seem fairly well substantiated, at least, by people who tell these stories. Of course, it's impossible to like provide empirical evidence of these things. But what I think is so interesting is when you see this ontological recontextualization with very intelligent people, like those people I named before, like John Mack, like J. Allen Hynek, like Jacques Vallée. These are people who are extremely well-heeled academics, geniuses in their given fields. They look at everything empirically and from a nuts and bolts kind of basis, and then they slowly have their entire view of reality changed through interacting with the phenomena and realizing that there's some other kind of higher intelligence seemingly over the top of whatever is manifesting as UFOs or as these beings. And by the way, the name I was blanking on before somehow was John Keel. And John Keel came to this very similar conclusion that, what you have to conclude from seeing these flaps, seeing these instances of high weirdness, is that we're dealing with something that is probably ultimately non-physical in nature, but has the ability to, at times, through rules we probably don't understand, instantiate itself or show up or pass through window areas and show up as beings that seem to disappear as mysteriously as they appear, but yet they can also physically interact with people, and crazy things happen that sound like they're totally impossible, but then you get such well documented cases of it, like the Virginia case, where you're like, it definitely seems like some shit happened here. It's impossible to chalk this up to just sort of like weird dreams or momentary manifestations of non-physical things. So trying to square that circle in my mind is something I'm super interested in. And I'm wondering if you have you gone down that leg of the phenomena much?
Oh, I think about it. I mean, like, I remember people would say, well, you've been at this over 30 years. Like, what conclusions have you drawn? And I would, I'd say, well, the phenomenon is real. It's global. And it appears to be, and there are exceptions on some things, but it appears to be an omnipresent intelligence that has the ability to manifest itself in a multitude of ways. Like, it's nuts and bolts, but it's also psychic. I remember interviewing, I'll think of his name in a second. I'm looking at his face. He was a pilot for, I think it was Northwest Airlines. And cowboy hat. I was interviewing him about the Phoenix Lights case, probably in the late 90s or early 2000s. And he described this incredible, massive object. He said it was just dragging. It was so low, it was almost touching the ground. Like, it was just colossal, like a floating city kind of thing, or department store. And his name will come to me. And at the end of the sighting, and he was a pilot, and he was a very grounded guy, very pragmatic, super believable. And his son was there, and his son also witnessed it. And he goes, there's one more thing. And I said, oh, what? Tell me. Nah, I don't know. I don't want to talk about it. And I said, no, come on. I want to, please, like, I'm here. I got the camera rolling. Like, he knew what he was about to say was going to come off. He knew how he would look at it.
Yeah.
He else had said it. And he was saying that to me. And he's like, oh, God, it said something to me. And I said, this is new, somewhat. And I said, well, what did it say? Yeah, God. And he goes, well, we mean you no harm, or we come in peace, something like that. Yeah. But he knew what that sounded like. Right. And he was, struggling to share that aspect of his encounter with me. And of course, you've heard that, many times. It was like, the Tic Tac with Fravor.
Yeah.
You know, it's like Fravor saying that it went to his cap point. You know, he said the hair on the back of his neck stood up because that's kind of like, hey man, I know your next move. I'm one step ahead. Boom, boom, boom. You know, there was an intelligence, and the fact that the Tic Tac was mimicking Fravor's. You know, and I know some people are saying that's technology from Lockheed Martin. Well, if it is, wow.
Yeah.
But it is interesting how it was mimicking, like Fravor went in on a dive and he was doing a spiral kind of dive down, and it did exactly the opposite coming up at him. That was interesting. And then going to his cap point. I mean, that's just, I don't know.
Well, perfect segue, because remember I mentioned that Dolan and I sort of extracted a really interesting nugget together. So Dolan, myself, and do you know Paul Smith, the former Stargate remote viewer?
No.
He's been at Contact a bunch of times.
I've heard his name.
Really good guy, really intelligent guy. Went on to get a PhD in philosophy, really deeply researched in psi and psychology and philosophy. But anyway, so me, Dolan, and him were doing a podcast. And early on, the conversation, we're talking about remote viewing because Paul was a remote viewer for Project Stargate. And Paul was very reluctant at first to explore the phenomenon in general because he had seen so much sort of irresponsible work done or, prognostication done on the connections between remote viewing, psychic stuff, and the phenomenon, though he was interested in it. So anyway, he offered up to me and Dolan that he was actually hired during ATIP or OSAP by Hal Puthoff to do a remote viewing project. So not just him, but put together a team of remote viewers to try to remote view the Nimitz incident. So there was this whole
wait, what?
Yeah, man. Yeah.
So wait,
yeah.
You're saying that they went back they were supposed to go back in time.
Yes.
To that incident.
Yes.
So was the remote viewer given details of the incident, or was he just given coordinates and a date?
So
I'm just curious.
Was kind of, I don't know exactly how the protocol was given, but I do know that at the time they did not know what they were supposed to be remote viewing. And then he said that Hal sort of, because he knew Hal prior to this, he and Hal are friends. So he said after that, Hal sort of told him like, yeah, that you guys were working on the Nimitz incident. And Paul was sort of like, stingy with too many details that he was willing to offer, but he did acknowledge that it happened. He did acknowledge that they tried to set everything up in the same way they were doing it at Fort Meade during the active Stargate days. All the same protocols, same type of teams and everything, multiple remote viewers. And he also said that he wasn't happy with the results. But that's pretty much all he said.
Yeah. Sorry, who wasn't happy with the results?
Paul wasn't. He wasn't happy with whatever they came up with, apparently.
With whatever he came up with, I'm not clear on that, because if he it wasn't a double blind, but he didn't know. He was given coordinates, I would imagine a date and coordinates, and he provided information from what he gathered from those coordinates. And then he wasn't satisfied with that data.
My understanding, so Paul was saying he personally wasn't satisfied with what they came up with. But yes, I believe you're right in that they were blind. Like they didn't know what target they were working until afterward. Hal sort of under the table, they were out to dinner or something. And Hal was like, yeah, you were supposed to be working on the Nimitz incident. But he didn't really tell me any other details other than that. Maybe
I had something extraordinary happened between me and Hal. Like, I mean, it was, I've only had, so you remember the individual that called me at the beginning of the show? And I said, all right, let me take this call real quick from you. Yep. That's Tim Coleman. We partnered together and we did Out of the Blue. He's 10 years my senior. And we were in the edit room one afternoon, and it was Boris and Tim and myself. Excuse me. We were working in an apartment on the top level that had a balcony, and it was in San Francisco, and it overlooked this park called Dolores Park. And, excuse me, we got into an argument, and I was the director, and I was like, the buck stopped with me. I mean, I had partners, but it was like, I would ultimately be the final decision maker, and I would always respect their opinions on stuff, if I agreed with it. But if I didn't, I'd put my foot down. And in this case, one time we were having this spirited debate, and I put my foot down, and Tim was furious with me, and he was probably had some, residual resentment from the fact that I refused to look into Virginia, but whatever.
Right.
He got really upset, and I just said, "No, Tim, absolutely not over my dead body. Like, we're not doing that." And no. And he stormed off, and he left. And Boris and I kept working. And about 10 minutes later, I suddenly saw a film strip of Tim with a key on my right front quarter panel of my gold 4-door 1980 something BMW. And I was watching him key the right front quarter panel. Like it was like watching a film strip. I was watching it. And I said to myself, I could literally just walk out the double glass doors, like onto the balcony, and look down to the street below, and I could see him doing it. But I didn't even need that level of validation. I don't know how to describe it.
You just knew
saw
it. Wow.
Saw it. I saw it. Really strange. So 3 or 4 hours later, finished working, packed up my stuff, went down to my car. There it was. There was the key scratch right there in the right front quarter panel, just like I saw. So I called Tim, and I said, Tim, I know that you keyed my car. And he said, I bloody well demand you retract that statement. How dare you accuse me of such an accusation? And I said, Tim, look, I know you did it. I saw you do it in my head. And look, I understand it was the heat of the moment. You're upset. I forgive you. Just get it fixed. And when you, come to terms, and he was the whole time, I demand, click, we hang up, cell phones. And I don't know, 3 or 4 days later, and Tim will tell you, he called me up and he goes, you're bloody psychic. I said, well, I don't know how to describe it, man, but I saw that. And I've had 3 of those incidents in my lifetime. Okay. 3. One of them was with Hal. And I can't go into the specifics, but I saw something.
Wow.
And I grappled with it for over a year. And the other night, I finally got to confront Hal face to face, not on the phone, not on Signal. And I was like, this is what I saw. And he just looked at me, and I said, I've only had a couple of these in my lifetime, and they've never been wrong. This is what I saw. Well, I said, tell me I'm not crazy, because he couldn't confirm it.
Mm-hmm.
And he looked at me and he said, you're not crazy. That was it.
Oh, man. And see, now I'm thinking of all of these other things that do.
How do you explain that?
I can't, other than I'm very careful with using the word believer, but I would say that I am a believer in that we clearly have these extrasensory capabilities. And I don't think they're well understood. I don't think it's possible for 99.9% of the population to control them. And I think oftentimes they only make sense in hindsight. Like maybe some of those circumstances that you've had on the road where you just have these random impulses, those could be some kind of example of this, right? It would be crazy to say that you orchestrated those circumstances, like getting bit by the spider and then all these things happening downstream of it. And yet I think there could be some level of non-local agency or retrocausal agency where things happen in just the right way they need to happen. Because there's just so many freaking examples of that. And we can't know what we don't know, right? Maybe these things are happening a million times every day, but then we never get the feedback necessary to see, well, if I would have went out the door at that time, I would have been hit by a car. So, but maybe it's happening all the time. But yeah, man.
Let me give you one more really quick one.
Yeah, please do. I love these.
So I was visiting my sister, who unfortunately just passed, Janine, who lived in Colorado. And it was a great place to she had a bunch of bicycles at her house, and I would always go out for a bicycle ride, just enjoy the beautiful Boulder weather. And I had a Panama hat, because I'd gone a couple years prior to that. I'd gone to Ecuador. My sister was down in Ecuador for over a year with her kids and her husband. And I was making, at the time, I Know What I Saw. And I was super busy. And Janine my sister, she's like, she'd call me, and it was so funny. Sometimes it would take me forever to get back to her, but she'd call me and she'd be like, "I don't give an F how busy you are. I'm sick and tired of hearing about it. I da da da. Get your beep down here, right?" And I'm like, okay. So right at the time when I was delivering, I know what I saw. I took off for like a week or two, and I went to Cuenca, Ecuador with my sister and her family because she was like, "We're only here for another couple months. We've been here a year and a half. Get your butt down here. You got to experience this stuff." So anyway, I came back and I bought a couple of Panama hats because they were made in Cuenca. Beautifully hand-stitched, lovely, just stunningly beautiful. And I was wearing that hat, and I was probably, I want to say a couple of years into making the phenomenon, maybe 3-4 years in. And I was visiting my sister. I had the Panama hat on, and I was riding my bicycle. And my son was probably 2. Yeah, probably 2. And I had him in a little basket. We were cruising around on this bicycle together. And I came whipping around this corner on a trail, and my hat flew off. And it was flying up way up in the air because I was going probably 15, 20 miles an hour. Hat flew off. Long turnaround. I come back, and there's a guy standing there holding my hat. He caught it with his hands. And it was Mark Barish, the guy that ended up writing the Rua Zimbabwe segment
wow.
with me.
Holy shit.
Had gone to Africa with John Mack and had done a deep dive into that case. And you're James Fox, and and we partnered up, and we reminisce on that. Like, what were the odds? What were the odds of that encounter?
Yeah, man.
My hat flew off. That he happened to be walking out this door and he caught it. Like, what I mean?
It's too novel for me. It's too novel for me, man. Like, yeah, the trickster plays Mercurius, as the weird esoteric nerds say, works in mysterious ways for sure. But that this is another thing that is very adjacent to the phenomena, like writ large. And again, Hal Puthoff, what an interesting microcosm of this point as well, because he got his start, or is most well known, at least, for cutting his teeth in all of these clandestine classified programs through Project Stargate, through doing psychic experimentation, literally sort of founding the practice of remote viewing with Ingo Swann, working with various contractors and agencies and stuff like that. And then somehow he goes into all of this other UFO related stuff, seemingly. Granted, he is a physicist first and foremost anyway, so maybe that speaks to his expertise more directly. But it is a tantalizing question. Why is a guy who has this background in doing all this psychic research, how does he so cleanly seem to pivot into all of this other phenomena related stuff? And it also seems like when you start getting into all this legacy program stuff, yes, of course, you get into the advanced alternative propulsion technologies and anti-gravity and electrogravitics, all of this stuff, plasma a little bit. But then you also hear about the weird psychic stuff, like remote viewing. Jesse Michaels did that fabulous episode with the guy who claims he was part of some NSA program to psychically contact non-human intelligence. So there does seem to be.
Oh yeah, what was that guy's name?
I know he wrote the book Above Black, but I'm blanking on his name. And Dolan speaks highly of that book and that guy as well. And I mean, he was. I don't know if you saw that interview, but he was incredibly compelling, I thought.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to remember that guy. I'm so sorry. I can't believe I can't remember his name. I should know that. I'm looking at his big blue eyes.
Yeah, we'll definitely flash it up on the screen. Definitely worth watching that interview. But yeah, what is your sense of what that relationship is between the psychical stuff, and the phenomena at large?
I sometimes think I'll give you an example, and I the more I tell this story as I get older, the more I realize that there are a lot of people out there that don't believe we went to the moon. I'm not one of them. But I was probably in my late 20s, and it was a huge get for me. I got an interview with former Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell.
Yeah.
And we were talking about
Legend.
UFOs, and he kind of grew up in and around Roswell, and he was friends with a lot of the ranchers, and they shared stuff with him. And the aerospace industry had shared stuff with him. So between, the people on the ground and, he'd known a lot about, Roswell and the phenomenon overall. And I was just, pinching myself at his home in Florida, just going, my God, this is incredible. I'm sitting with a guy who walked on the moon, and he's telling me all these incredible things. And I was like, I want to know what it was like to go to the moon. Like, I got this opportunity. I'm sitting with a guy who walked on the damn moon. So I said, hey, Dr. Mitchell, I'm so sorry to ask this of you, because I know you've been asked this so many times. It's all anybody wants to ask you is, what was it like to go to the moon? I said, I'm really sorry. Could we take like a little pause and this UFO stuff and just, could you take me to the moon with you? And he goes, well, James, sure. If you want. Yeah. And so he went into like, when it was like orbiting, planet Earth and the translunar injection and all the calculations and trying to get the trajectory just right. And that it would either smash into the moon or ricochet off out into space if they didn't get it right. And, all this detail. And he goes, James, I was so caught up in the task at hand. I barely had time on the way to the moon to reflect on what I was actually doing. He's like, I might as well have been in a simulator. And then I had to land the lunar lander, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, get back off the moon. He talked about walking on the surface of the moon, and they were supposed to rest because they'd basically been up for 3 days getting to the moon. And NASA instructions were like, you guys need to get in your hammocks and rest. And they were like, got in their hammocks, and they were lying there, and there was like, oh, we're on the surface of the moon right now. We can't, and he described like you could hear these macrometeorites pelting the skin of the craft somehow. I remember him talking about that. I don't know if they were going through it or just bouncing off it. I'm not sure. But he talked about that. And then he said, the hell with it. Him and his buddy, I think it might have been Michael Collins, I can't remember, but the hell with it. We're going to go walk on the moon. They put against the will of NASA, and they're going to go walk on the surface of the moon. And then he said he described like seeing this marble, this like blue marble suspended in the vacuum of space, Earth. And then he had these big gardening gloves on his suit, and he reached out, I believe it was one hand, and he covered up the entire Earth, everything we know, all religions, all cultures, wars, all that stuff, all the history. And he described that. And then he said when he was flying home, he goes, James, I had time to really reflect on what was happening. And I just suddenly had this really profound, deep sense of interconnectedness with like a web of consciousness, the molecules in his body, the molecules in the spacecraft, the molecules in the stars, all connected, all one web of consciousness. He conducted this ESP experiment.
Yeah.
Highly, successful for the most part. And he goes, because I felt it, I experienced it, I lived it, and then he founded the Noetic Institute to try to make sense of that epiphany that he had in space. So I think about like, the web of consciousness, it's everywhere, right? It's all connected. And thought doesn't even travel at the speed of light. Like thought is instantaneous, it could go across the galaxy immediately, right? You can communicate with something. How is that possible? Anyway, so sometimes I wonder, about the phenomenon, and maybe we're all connected. Maybe we're all connected to the web of consciousness. Maybe, as Dr. Italo had talked about, when he looked into the eyes of the being, in this latest version of my film, when he describes looking in the eyes of the being, he said it was a very advanced intelligence. And I remember pinning him down a little on that. But what do you mean a very advanced intelligence? Way more advanced than anything I've ever seen on Earth. Like, that you looked, there was so much to learn from looking in the eyes of that being.
Excuse me. É um ser sublime. É diferente de nós. Não tem maldade. Não vi maldade nenhuma ali.
I saw zero malice on this being.
É um anjo, né?
An angel.
Oh. Um anjo, né?
An angel.
Obrigado, viu? I would not be coming back for 15 years if I didn't believe it.
Ele não estaria voltando para cá por 15 anos se ele não acreditasse.
Claro. Pode acreditar. Pode acreditar.
You can't believe it.
Nós temos muito que aprender naquele olhar.
And I just wonder sometimes about, what it would be like for someone on the outside looking in at Earth. We're like a bunch of Neanderthals with nuclear weapons, right? We're all killing each other. We can't get along. We can't even get along with each other. How are we going to look at another, species or another race? I don't mean race. I mean extraterrestrial
species,
or non-human intelligence, however you want to phrase it, And so I kind of think like maybe this reality that this non-human intelligence that's interacting with us, like maybe that acknowledgement might be exactly what we need right now. Because there's so much, infighting and religious fighting and political stuff. I've had it. Everybody arguing with each other. We can't even get along with each other. It's so calling each other horrible names, blowing each other up. I don't know, man. Sometimes I think like that reality, like that acknowledgement of the fact that we're not alone, that acknowledgement that there's a higher intelligence that interacting with us, maybe that would have a unifying effect on all of us, on humanity.
Yeah.
I think that really kind of, I'm an eternal optimist. I think that could have, it could be exactly what the world needs right now.
Yeah, well said, my friend. And I think that seems to be what the vast majority of experiences seem to be pointing to, is that that whatever these beings are, they're probably at a minimum, if not from that web of intelligence directly, they seem to be more aware of it than we are. And having that kind of context would reorient everything dramatically. And, not to be like Mr. Cliche, where we're in some sort of a matrix, we're in some sort of, false perception of reality kind of Alice in Wonderland scenario. But man, if that were the case, you could really see why disclosure would be forbidden, right? Because it basically completely nullifies the power structure here on Earth. Like if we knew that we were really from this like higher consciousness and that there are all these other beings within that consciousness and they're just waiting for us to wake up to that reality so that we can join some sort of like cosmic community or something like that, man, like that would kind of break us out of this. And I don't know, have you read or watched those interviews with Matthew Brown that came out? Yeah.
Well,
They really seem to be pointing to something like that.
Just talking about him the other day because we were wondering if he was like, if any of the photographic evidence that he'd seen had anything to do with crash retrieval, and we made the determination that we couldn't. There's all this incredible high resolution 4K data that we would love to see, right?
Yeah.
What was that called? Immaculate Constellation.
Yes, right. And
like
he
on the phone, like it's that classified. You know?
And then he's another one of these guys who has gone incredibly spiritual and esoteric with his interests. And I think, to be fair, I think he may have had those interests and connected some dots from what I've gathered. But on that point, in the last few minutes, I mean, we probably don't have too much time to go deep into this, but I'm very interested in not just crash retrieval, but that whole legacy program conversation that you obviously to some extent dove into in your film, The Program. And I guess overarching question, do you get the sense that this program was really one cohesive thing, or was it this sort of thing that is really a bunch of disparate data points and projects that were kind of unifying into one gestalt, but really it wasn't all that connected? Or do you think there is some sort of like overarching invisible authority that is orchestrating some kind of, I guess what we could just to colloquially call legacy program, where reverse engineering, crash retrieval, all of these aspects of the, various parts of the phenomena were sort of handled in a very cloistered, very classified way?
The first credible, I would say, from my standpoint, exposure that I had to the crash retrieval. Obviously, I'd looked into Roswell.
Yeah.
And I was impressed that they had put out that press release, and it was on the front page of the local paper that they'd recovered something that seemed to be otherworldly or flying saucer or whatever. So I was very impressed with Roswell, but I was still trying to process that. And I went around the country in the 90s with, I was a cameraman for Stephen Greer. And I just kind of wanted to know, like, did this guy really have access to a bunch of witnesses or not? I was like, let me check it out. And I offered my services at a very, practically nothing, but yeah. And I was like, let me go around and see if this guy really does have access to some people. And, I was like, well, you definitely met some folks, some of which I was very impressed with. Others I was kind of, raising an eyebrow. But I got to operate the camera. I filmed for Way Gant, I think his name was. And you could look him up now. This was in the 90s. And he was talking about, and he was a young guy. He was probably my age at the time, maybe a little older. I don't know, maybe probably right around my age. We were both in our 20s. And he was going to go on camera, and then he got really spooked, and he seemed so scared, and he seemed so like conflicted. And then he finally just says, "Off, screw it. I'm gonna give you guys the interview." And he does. And he talks about this egg-shaped object that he came upon, and I don't remember the specifics, quite honestly. I haven't watched the interview since I shot it. I saw little clips here and there. I think David Marler interviewed him. Wayland. You know the guy I'm talking about?
I want to look him up almost just to see if I do know who you're talking about.
So he talked about coming upon, I think it was in Peru, and he came upon an alleged crash site of an egg-shaped craft, and it was embedded in the hillside.
Oh, yeah, I know the story.
Weird,
yeah.
Goop dripping out of it. And he was like, what the hell? And he had some telepathic communication with what might have been the occupants on the inside. And he was just like, what the is going on here? And then all of a sudden, this team arrives, like SWAT-style team arrives, weapons drawn.
Yeah.
He was threatened. They were threatened. He's like, whoa, man, whoa, I'm on your team, buddy. Like, what are you guys doing? Like, we're here and see this, and just fully threatened, like, throw you out of the helicopter and you'll be in the middle of the, and, but at the time I was like, man, I got to meet this guy. I mean, I was really having a rough time wrapping my mind around this one. I mean, it was really altering. Talk about, ontological shock for me. Because it's one thing to watch something on a video, but when you're actually sitting across and looking in their eyes and talking to them, I was very impressed. I got to tell you, man, I wouldn't say that I just believed it, but I certainly didn't not believe it.
Right.
I was very impressed. It was one of those things where I kind of put it in the back of my head, but there were all the aspects: crash retrieval, hyper organized, like, is it Air Force Office of Special Information run by the CIA? And I remember at one point, anyway, I put it in the back of my head, and I didn't know how to process it, to be honest with you. It really shocked me. But I kind of believed him. I was like, God, I kind of believe this guy, but my Lord, if this is true, this is insanity. And sat down with Eric Davis, and I have to release this aspect of the interview, because he went through like the chain of command and like who's at the top and like how it filters down and how the secrecy is maintained. And I can't even remotely do it justice, but he did it so matter of fact. Like, he's like, oh yeah, these guys are at the top down here. The Air Force operates this special assets program, wave and acknowledge, like da 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 da. And he's like, this is how it all works. And he took him like 15 minutes, 10 or 15 minutes. And I couldn't squeeze that into the program, my new film, because I interviewed Hal for the program and Eric Davis for this one, for my latest Moment of Contact, new revelations of alien contact, because you have to differentiate the first cut, right, from the second one, because they're very different. So I'm rambling at this point, but to answer your question, like in terms of the legacy UAP crash retrieval program, I'm now convinced more than ever before, that they do exist. They have an uncanny ability to monitor like specific locations where these events unfold, because somehow, according to all the witnesses that I've interviewed, they're just right there. Like they get there within minutes. How do they have that ability? How do they have the ability to warn the Brazilian authorities that this thing was coming in? How would they know more than the Brazilians? So it's, this UAP crash retrieval legacy program, in my humble opinion, exists.
Yeah, that's certainly the sense you get when you read the Wilson Davis memo, and it seems like there's some pretty good evidence to suggest that's legit at this point.
Oh, totally.
Yeah. So
we did a deep dive on that memo, and it was so funny. It's like the head of the DIA, it basically shows up at, I guess it was Lockheed, but they don't say that.
Right.
But I'm pretty sure it was Lockheed.
Yeah.
And the guy's basically like, you can go kick rocks. It's like, he finally told him, all right, yeah, it's true, we have it, but you can go kick rocks. It's like, told the head of it was the DIA, right? It was.
Yeah. It was was he a lieutenant colonel?
Oh, he was top. I mean, you can look him up in the thing. Wilson, Admiral Wilson.
Yeah. Or Admiral, not Colonel. Yeah.
Yeah, Admiral Wilson, but I think he was promoted and he was head of I want to say he was head of the DIA, but go look it up. But he was at the top. He should have had oversight. He didn't have oversight. He found this program, and they eventually knocks on the door at Lockheed, and they basically confirm, yeah, we have it. It's none of your damn business. Kick rocks.
Yeah.
And
he's corresponding with Eric Davis, who we're talking about. Yeah.
I talked to people in the U.S. government that I was like, well, didn't you guys get a hold of it? He's still around? Yeah, he's still around. And he said, he said to them, because they're like, we're going to bring you into a skiff and we're going to find out what you know. And he goes, sure, you can bring me into the skiff. You can subpoena me, whatever you need to do. But I'm going to tell you the same thing I'm telling you over the phone as I'm going to tell you in the skiff. And he said that in the memo.
Yeah.
If this comes out, I'm going to deny it. And it's exactly what he's doing. Maybe he'll come out. Who knows?
Man.
Or maybe that's one of the cool things in this new cut of Moment of Contact is I actually went to a couple of the hearings, right? And I, captured some of that stuff. And you got like George Knapp. And I was like, interesting. They invited George Knapp to testify, but George Knapp was giving out names.
Yeah, he was. Yeah.
Remember?
Yes. He named someone, I don't remember who at the CIA, but yeah.
And then the other person who apparently was head of something in technology for the CIA. But yeah. So
hopefully saying that name doesn't get this shadow banned at the very end of the podcast.
Yeah, right.
Well, hey, speaking of which, man, this absolutely flew by. Thanks for doing this. I'm super stoked on your new film, and just so much fun talking to you, man.
Hey, I appreciate you having me on, and let everybody know that it's available on Amazon and Apple and Google. I don't know if you have the Genius link. And right now it's only for sale, but we're gonna make it available to rent. And I know it's $14.99, and that's not cheap. If you like my work and you want to continue to support it, buy it. If not, wait a little bit. It'll be out for rental for like $4 or $5.99, and that'll be very soon. And then if that's too much, I always make my stuff available for streaming for free online, and that'll happen in a few months down the road. Beautiful. So I appreciate you guys' support. I appreciate you having me on the show.
Of course, man. Hang on for me when I hang up here.
You got it.